kind introduction, and thank you for having me here. Thank you, Dr. Agrawal, for extending the invitation to participate in this exciting webinar. What I'm going to do in next 15 to 20 minutes is to discuss 5 practice-changing studies in the field of multiple myeloma. And what I have done is to focus on the major meetings in last 2 years, that's in 19 and 20, that's ASH 2019, ASCO, and EHA, to just cover the spectrum, starting from newly diagnosed multiple myeloma to post-transplant therapy to transplant ineligible multiple myeloma, as well as relapsed refractory myeloma. There is a lot of exciting things happening in the field of multiple myeloma. So I'll begin with the study, the most talked about study of the year. That's the Endurance trial, phase 3 trial comparing carfilzomib versus bortezomib in addition to lenalidomide dexamethasone in newly diagnosed multiple myeloma. So this is a study which was in individuals who are being planned for deferred transplant, meaning being planned for transplant at the time of progressive disease. They did not include high-risk multiple myeloma, and the reason probably was that one of the acceptable induction regimen for high-risk multiple myeloma was KRD, and therefore randomizing these patients would become difficult. So they just wanted to look at standard risk multiple myeloma and what's the best induction therapy, whether it's combination of bortezomib with lendexa or carfilzomib with lendexa. So that was their first endpoint, and for that they were looking at progression-free survival after the induction regimen. A second very important question which the study is addressing is whether lenalidomide maintenance for a fixed duration versus a continuous maintenance is important, and the endpoint there is overall survival. They compared 12 cycles, that's 36 weeks of VRD with 36 weeks of KRD, that's 9 cycles of KRD. And they looked at second interim analysis in Jan 2020 in terms of progression-free survival. If we look at the patients, almost 1/3 of the patients were more than 70 years. And if you look at, they were relatively well-preserved patients, almost close to 80 to 90% of patients were performance status 0 to 1. 1114 translocation was present in around 20% of patients, as well as 414 was there in roughly around 10% of patients. If you look at this study, you can see both graphs for both KRD and VRD are merging with each other. And there was no difference in progression-free survival at the median follow-up of 29 months. When they looked at patients who were more than 70 years, though there is no statistical difference, but VRD seems to be doing a little better as compared to KRD. And when they censored patients who underwent transplant, despite the plan was deferred transplant, some of them did undergo stem cell transplant. And when they censored these patients, still there was no difference. And same way, though the data is not mature, the 3-year overall survival was not different between the two arms. If you look at the response rates, the interesting thing is that if you look at the VGPR or better than VGPR rates, they were much more in the KRD arm as compared to the VRD arm. Still, there was no difference in progression-free survival. One thing I just want to highlight here, the VRD CR rates, if you look at the stringent CR rates or the VGPR rates, are very similar to what was seen in SWOG study with established VRD as induction regimen. But if you look at the KRD arm, where the CR rate and the VGPR rates, they look little less as compared to what was there in the phase 2 data, as well as the Forte trial, where the stringent CR rates were almost close to 50% and above with KRD 12 cycles, not 9 cycles, but 12 cycles. So this looks little different. The other important thing is the side effect profile. So as expected, they used bortezomib on twice weekly schedule, day 1, 4, 8, 11, and it was IV. Therefore, the peripheral neuropathy was much higher in this age, in this particular subset of patients who received VRD. And on the other hand, if you look at the KRD arm, there was much more incidence of cardiopulmonary events. So almost 16% total. And if you look at the grade 3, it's almost 12%. So statistically quite significant cardiopulmonary event. Again, the rates which were much higher as compared to what we have seen from the earlier phase data or from the relapsed refractory myeloma studies. So the conclusion of this study is that in the deferred ASCT setting, in patients who do not have high-risk disease, the permitted ones are the intermediate risk. KRD does not improve progression-free survival as compared to the VRD. What we don't get from here is what is the reason why the higher VGPR rates have not translated into the better PFS, and what is the reason why the study has little higher cardiopulmonary toxicity reported as opposed to the other earlier studies with this combination. Moving on to from endurance, we move to stamina, and it does need stamina and endurance to run these trials. One very important thing which I forgot for the endurance trial, that for the first time I've seen that they have done a triplet versus triplet comparison, and it was an investigator-initiated trial. Typically, the registration trials in myeloma, all along what we have seen, it's a comparison of a doublet or a triplet versus triplet, or a quadruplet versus triplet. It's never been a head-to-head comparison of regimen like VRD or KRD, what we have seen. So really, really a very important, a landmark study which has answered a very important question that in non-high-risk patients, those who are 414 or standard risk otherwise, VRD still remains a standard of care in terms of induction regimen. We are awaiting answer regarding len maintenance. A part of that answer has come from the stamina trial, and this is the trial which we have the long-term follow-up data here. So this was again a randomized trial done in transplant eligible patients, both high risk as well as standard risk. What they wanted to answer, so induction regimen was any. What they wanted to answer, what's the best post-transplant regimen, whether it's transplant followed by consolidation, whether it's transplant followed by maintenance, or it's transplant followed by a second transplant. All patients did receive lenalidomide maintenance. And the primary endpoint for the study was progression-free survival, which they wanted to estimate at 38-month endpoint. And this was published earlier in JCO in 2019. And you can see there is no difference in terms of whether you use only len maintenance or you do consolidation or you do second transplant in terms of progression-free survival. So you can safely just consider only continuing with len maintenance. However, some interesting observation came from this long-term study. One, that half of the patients discontinued lenalidomide maintenance at 38 months duration. The other half continued, and there was no difference in terms of different groups, whether they were in tandem transplant group or the consolidation or maintenance group. The numbers are almost similar, and same way it was similar in high risk and standard risk. So almost more than 2/3 of patients at baseline were standard risk and 1/3 were high risk. So discontinuation was very similar. So one, the long-term follow-up told us that even at the end of this long follow-up, the 5 years and the 6-year data, the progression-free survival and overall survival is not different in terms of different strategies what we use post-transplant. However, the study did stratify these patients as compared to in terms of standard risk and high risk. And when they looked at as per treatment, meaning when they looked at the per protocol kind of an analysis, the progression-free survival in the tandem transplant group was, or the double transplant group was much better as compared to the other two. So there is some suggestion that those who have high-risk disease probably transplant, a second transplant in terms of the post-transplant strategy is better as compared to consolidation and maintenance. The other important thing which came up from this study is the continuation of lenalidomide versus discontinuation. So as I highlighted earlier, that almost half the patient discontinued lenalidomide at the end of 38 months. What you can see clearly that those who discontinued lenalidomide, they experienced an inferior progression-free survival as compared to those who continued. So the hazard ratio is almost 3.82, a significant difference. And this is very, very obvious in this particular graph. However, what is important to highlight here, that the difference was maximum when we looked at standard risk. So what it means that people who have standard risk disease post-transplant, if they discontinued lenalidomide after 38 months, their progression-free survival was inferior as compared to those who continued. As opposed to that, it did not affect the high-risk group that much. However, having said that, there was no difference in the overall survival between the groups. So as I showed in the endurance trial, the second question which they are asking is the duration, fixed versus continued lenalidomide. There is some suggestion that in the group which endurance trial is looking at is where the continuous therapy is probably better as compared to stopping lenalidomide. However, we need to look at that data as it matures, because in stamina trial, in the current trial, the induction regimen was variable. People use doublet, they use non-bortezomib based induction also in almost 20% of patients. So therefore, we need to now look at the endurance trial and get this answer regarding duration of len maintenance. The third study is we move towards non-transplant eligible patients, and this is the Alcyon study. And again, this is a long-term follow-up data. So the Alcyon study addressed transplant ineligible, newly diagnosed multiple myeloma, who were stratified based on the age as well as the region, European Union versus others, as well as the ISS. What I want to highlight here that the comparison was daratumumab with VMP. Both arms received 9 cycles of this combination. Then the Dara VMP arm continued to receive Dara maintenance. And what they wanted to look at is progression-free survival. That was their primary endpoint. And the secondary endpoint, one of the pre-specified interim analysis, they said that they are going to look at the OS once they have 209 events. I always find this comparison very unfair that when one arm continues to receive therapy versus other arm receives the fixed duration, and we look at the progression-free survival. If we are continuing with active therapy, I'm not really sure progression-free survival is the right endpoint there, but that's my question and it remains in my mind always. So let's look at this data. So if you look at the patients here, they were, almost 30% patients again were more than 75 years. You had these performance status, again, almost 1/4 who had performance status 2. You can look at the ISS, again, almost 40% in both arms had ISS 3 disease, and roughly 20% or so had high-risk cytogenetic profile. So keep this in mind when we are interpreting the analysis. So this was the first publication from this study, which came at a median follow-up of 16.5 months, published in NEJM. And you can see clearly that there is a difference in progression-free survival between the daratumumab and the Dara VMP versus VMP arm. So which was not very convincing. But if you look at this progression-free survival data here, which is at 42 months, and you can see that the later half, after the 9 months are over, that's a phase where only daratumumab was continuing, and you can see that the graph is continuing to separate. So this is 48% at 42 months as opposed to 14 months. And if you look at what happened as they continued daratumumab in form of maintenance, the responses deepened. So if you look at earlier follow-up, the overall response rates remained the same, 91%, 91%, but the CR and the stringent CR rates improved over a period of time. And so the MRD negativity. So as the time passed, the number of people who achieved MRD negativity, it became much higher in individuals who received Dara VMP as compared to those who received only VMP arm. The other advantage of achieving MRD negativity is that those who achieved MRD negativity, they experience much longer PFS in both arms, both in VMP arm as well as in the Dara VMP arm. The other thing which this long-term data highlighted, that the pre-specified analysis showed that not only just the PFS is better with Dara VMP, it's the overall survival which is better. So it puts to the rest the question or the thought that it's only the continuous therapy which is improving the progression-free survival. It's improving even the overall survival at the median follow-up of 40.1 months. So something to look forward for those who have who are non-transplant eligible elderly individuals who are going for induction therapy using Dara VMP makes sense. But it does come with the side effects. So there was relatively higher chance of infections, cytopenias in the patients who had received Dara VMP as compared to those who received VMP. So we have discussed the newly diagnosed multiple myeloma. Now we move towards the relapsed refractory multiple myeloma. And again, this was a late-breaking abstract in the ASH 2019, carfilzomib dexa along with daratumumab, comparing it with only carfilzomib dexamethasone. Here, the comparison in patients who received at least 1 to 3 prior therapies and have had at least partial response to 1 prior therapy. And the therapy was 32 months and 2:1 randomization in patients who are receiving Carfil Dexa Dara versus Carfil Dexa. And primary endpoint being progression-free survival. If you look at the patient profile, significant number of patients here are less than 65 years. So almost half of them are less than 65 years. Almost, close to around 80% of patients were ISS1 and ISS2. And if you look at high-risk abnormality, this is very much representative of what we see in this subgroup. Almost 15% were high-risk. What is important here is that more than 2 lines of therapy was patients who had received more than 2 lines of therapy were almost half in both arms. bortezomib and lenalidomide were the treatments used in patients who had, so if you look at 92% of patients in the daratumumab arm had received bortezomib, and almost 1/3 were refractory to bortezomib and lenalidomide in both arms. So this is the subgroup where this particular treatment was used. And the PFS was much better in the DARA arm as compared to carfilzomib dexa arm alone. What is interesting here to see is that this particular triplet benefited individuals who had ISS 1 or 2. It benefited individuals who had good performance status, those who were younger, less than 64 years, those who had standard risk disease, those who had more than 2 lines of therapy, those who had received earlier LEN, or those who were refractory to LEN and proteasome. So this is the analysis, and what I don't want everyone to look at only at hazard ratio. I want you to look at the 95% confidence interval, and wherever it's crossing more than 1, we need to look at with the pinch of salt. So the benefit was restricted to some groups. Some of it is pre-planned analysis, as they stratified the patients, but some of it is post hoc kind of analysis which they have done. So we need to think of, when we are using therapy in relapsed refractory myeloma, that what treatment has been given earlier, what is the kind of patient profile we are looking at, and then decide on treatment. If you look at the response rates, as expected, the overall response rates and the VGPRs were much better in the triplet arm as compared to the doublet arm. Again, the triplet came with a price. There were much more infections in the combination in the triplet arm as compared to the doublet arm, and rest was as expected with the individual agents. So if you look at this combination, it does improve the progression-free survival in relapsed refractory myeloma. We have to think in terms of those that pre-specified group, the benefit was maintained, but as we saw the analysis, we need to restrict probably its use in only those individuals. And we saw deeper responses, much more MRD negative CR rates in triplet as compared to doublet. And what is very important, that we need to select our patients. So those who had higher therapy, those who are elderly and frail, they experience much more toxicity here, which was fatal, and infection being one of the common problem there. Moving to the last but not the least important paper here, that's the CAR T-cell therapy in multiple myeloma. And this is the phase 2 KARMA trial with the ID-cell. So this is the same CAR T-cell data which Dr. Raje's group published in NEJM 2019, the phase 1 data, that's BV2121. It's again directed against the BCMA, as most of the CAR T-cells are in multiple myeloma. And this particular study, which was the phase 1 study, showed that if you used a dose of more than 150, it resulted in better PFS. So this was the study, again, a phase 2. After getting an idea that it works in phase 1 trial, the study was looking at overall response rate in patients who were heavily pretreated. And by a heavily pretreated, meaning they have already failed IMiD, PI, and anti-CD38, and they were refractory to their last line of therapy. What they wanted, that at least 50% or better overall response rate should be there, and then this therapy is acceptable. And with that premise, the trial was started. And as you can see clearly, that majority of the patients were refractory to anti-CD38, or they were triple refractory. So really a bad subgroup in terms of how they have done with their prior treatment. If you look at the overall response rate in this group, the overall response rate is 50 if you look at the lowest dose, but if you look at the 450 dose, it's almost 82%. And the time in which they could achieve this response was as low as 1 month. So they have crossed their predefined endpoint of 50%, and therefore this looks much more promising. If you look at the toxicity which you worry in CAR T-cell, that's the cytokine release syndrome and neurological toxicity, this seems to be much more tolerated. Even at the dose of 450, it's only 6%. If you look at 300, it's around 3%, grade 3 CRS, which they saw. If you look at the neurological toxicity, again, as the dose increases, around 450 and 300, it was more as compared to 150. So something to look forward to in terms of the triple refractory, as well as those who fail all lines of therapy, including an anti-CD38 in future. So with that, I would just conclude that it's very important to look at the study design when we are interpreting the result. The comparator does matter, as we saw in the endurance trial. It's very important to carefully select our patients and implement therapy from individual trials, as we learned from the CANTOR trial. And CAR T-cell bispecific antibody drug conjugates, as they've come up in last ASH EHA, they look very exciting options for relapsed refractory myeloma, those who fail multiple lines of treatment. So with that, I thank you, and I think we'll have the Q&A towards the end of the talk, end of the session. Thank you.